Hi guys, it's a pleasure seeing a full house today at BSides Las Vegas. We are here for Invoke-NoShell, all the power with no shell, as in Powershell. Once we are leaving this place to eat our lunch in 25 minutes, we'll be able to actually take payloads easily, put them in a malicious document, and execute them without PowerShell.exe, which is nice for us since we're like kind of a good guys trying to act as bad guys many times. Without further ado, let's move to me. That's me. I'm working for a company called Minerva Labs, but this is not a sales pitch, so we don't care about this. I have background at threat intel, background as a threat intelligence analyst. I did some work as dev and full stack researcher, meaning that I tried anything from SCADA and Modbus to this crappy PowerShell stuff. I hate PowerShell. I'm sorry, I'm about to swear about it like tons of times. I have many open source projects. This is my repository on GitHub. I have stuff there for bypassing sandboxes, like a Cuckoo, not a sandbox as in browsers, and a project for copy-paste malware built from scratch, and all kinds of cool stuff. Just like browse there and you'll be good. So, yeah, my name is Gal, by the way, which is just like Gal Gadot. That's like the best thing she ever did, was being famous, because now I can actually explain my name really easily. It's a unisex name, so don't worry about it. It actually means wave in Hebrew, which is kind of a cool name, think about it. Yeah, no worries. And feel free to follow me on Twitter, on GitHub, on, I don't know, even on Instagram if you really want to. Yeah, there will be tons of cheap effects in this presentation, so stay tuned. Okay, let's move to the outline of the presentation. We'll start with a bit of a background about PowerShell, what it is good for, absolutely nothing. But for blue teamers and red teamers, from the different point of views, why PowerShell is so good or bad. We'll move then to the actual tool to Invoke-NoShell, and how does it work, and why it is better than what we have right now. And then we'll introduce how it actually works and performs against real-life AVs, which is kind of what we're doing on our daily life. Okay, so let's begin with the blue team point of view. What is PowerShell for blue teamers? Well, it is kind of a programming language, mostly for Windows, now for Linux and Mac, I guess. I don't know who uses this kind of stuff on Linux, but good for you. It is really powerful. It is actually really easy to learn and use, which is good since we lack trained IT personnel. So this is one of the reasons it is so popular. Even I can code in PowerShell. It has all of the power of .NET. .NET can do anything on Windows, really anything, even more than the people designing .NET intended to, I guess. So PowerShell packs all the .NET power inside, which is good for blue teamers because they can do anything. It is compatible with WMI, COM objects, which is again really good because it enables us to do tons of stuff. Maintain the list of whatever in the cloud, for example. And it has better security nowadays. It has logging and AMSI, which you can send a buffer to your AV provider, which is really nice. However, it is not perfect. Remember that, for example, this is a recent thing from a blog of MDSec. For example, you can see that they do have better security now. And if you try to execute the system management automation, AMSI utils, get field, etc., and try to disable it, they will detect it. However, if you break it with a plus and you concatenate strings, or you just use double quotes instead of single quotes, you bypass it. So it's not perfect. We still have some improvements to make, but it's a better situation that we used to have. Okay, and it is so common that I did a survey among like 80 different friends of mine, how many people actually use PowerShell in their daily life. And 97% of the people use PowerShell. Some, like me, regret it, really regret it, but it is a very common language for a good reason. And let's continue to the red team's point of view, which is, I don't know, how many of you are red teamers? How many of you are blue teamers? Okay, so it's good. It's about 50-50 and maybe 20-20 and 60%, which are kind of anonymous, but just okay. No worries. So for red teamers, kind of surprisingly, the advantages for blue teamers are the same for red teamers alike, because we also lack well-trained red teamers. And it is easy to write bad stuff in PowerShell, really easy, almost too easy. It has all the power of .NET, which means we can do almost anything in malicious PowerShell, because .NET is so powerful. And it can communicate with WMI and COM object. You can use WMI, for example, to launch processes without having the parent process as the original one, which is kind of good if you want to fight EDRs, for example. Again, really nice. Just like a bit of a different advantage for PowerShell for red teamers is the fact that it is fileless. Well, this buzzword, I hate it, sorry, but it is an advantage. You can actually execute PowerShell scripts without writing it to the disk. Again, nice. Assists you to evade some detection tools or to make blue teamers' life way more miserable. The blue teamers in the crowd, I'm sure, will agree. Okay. Also, a key benefit of PowerShell, at least for red teamers, is the fact that tons of frameworks were already written for PowerShell. For example, PowerSploit, Invoke-Obfuscation, Veil, all of it, I think, is compatible with Metasploit, which is good for me as a skid. I just want to generate my payload, click on this exploit button, and set a C2 server, and I have a working backdoor out of the box, really easily. And well, we are all lazy. Well, you might say not lazy, maybe we are trying to be efficient is the word, but PowerShell is a good way to achieve powerful backdoors in no time, in a reliable way to bypass AVs, partially because of those frameworks. I did a quick survey about this as well. Only 50% of the responders were actually using PowerShell for malicious purposes, so I treated the results with respect only to those using PowerShell maliciously, and 83% of those using PowerShell for malicious purposes actually successfully bypass AV. The rest, 17%, I don't know, maybe you can take a private class with me afterwards. And 60% of those using PowerShell for malicious purposes use frameworks. The remaining 40%, I guess, well, maybe they're the kind of guys that invent their own cryptography or something. Use frameworks. It is good. It is really easy. Just use frameworks. They're really good. But, well, the life of red teamers with PowerShell are not that good as well. We do have some issues with PowerShell, like restricting PowerShell. You get 90,000 results on Google. You have some ways to restrict PowerShell execution. They are not making it impossible, but they make you struggle for a bit. And you have those annoying packager activation office thing, which means that if you try to, let's say, put an OLE object in a document today, and somebody clicks it in a fully up-to-date office, that's an important thing, you'll get this screen which blocks any kind of a batch PowerShell execution if it is an embedded object. Again, not perfect. It can be bypassed from the registry, for example, but it makes our life a bit more tough. And this is the most annoying thing, at least from my point of view, when I'm using PowerShell for offensive purposes. I use it often from a document. So I have a blank document, and I start thinking about what will I do now? I'll launch it on open, on close when the user clicks. Let's say I go for an on click, and then I need to write all of the VBA ugly code, and then I need to decide whether or not I want to use a EP bypass or not. Again, I think about, well, let's do the EP bypass, and then I generate my final combination of traits. Like the first trait is the on click, and the second one is the minus EP bypass. But I do all of it manually, which is really time consuming and really annoying, since VBA is even worse than PowerShell. Yeah, you're all agreeing on this, and it's awful thing, and I hate it. There is a framework called Lucky Strike, which is nice. it does solve some of the issues I'm struggling with, but it wasn't good enough for my kind of need. You'll see in a sec how I solve it out. So to sum it up, what we are missing is basically having a method to overcome restrictions effectively and to work at scale to generate all of those traits and combinations effectively and easily. At least from my point of view. I'm kind of a red teamer. So in this stage, I want to unveil Invoke-NoShell, which is, yeah, I promised cheap transitions between slides. Yeah. I wish to unveil Invoke-NoShell. Sorry for staying in the way. And, well, I don't want to kind of unveil directly. I want to unveil via a story I had, by a case I had. My boss comes to me one morning and he says, well, we have a potential client, but he says he has 100% protection against any PowerShell attack. Nothing can, yeah, exactly my response. I totally get it. And, well, I Googled for a while and I found this thing. This is the core of Invoke-NoShell. You might laugh, but this is PowerShell ISE, for those of you who don't know. And after Googling for a while, it turns out that if you place your PowerShell script in this place, which resolves to this path, you can actually get your script executed by PowerShell ISE instead of PowerShell.exe. It is nice. It has a UI which pops, but you can shut it down, you can hide it. It is a really nice way to execute it, and PowerShell.exe is never invoked. It is really nice. It overcomes many AVs which restrict PowerShell, but not PowerShell ISE, because why restricting PowerShell ISE? It can never execute PowerShell scripts. It can. Well, just need to read the manual. And, well, in this stage I had like my first trait and my kind of a path towards a final version of my infected document. But then I realized I need to find a way to bypass execution policy because, well, I guess that many of you already seen malicious documents and how they used to have like this -EP bypass all the time. But I can't use the same flag on PowerShell ISE because, well, it doesn't get these kind of arguments. It's not PowerShell, it's PowerShell ISE, and I can't use this -EP bypass. Fortunately enough, although 30% of the user always see this annoying message, it turns out this is execution policy is restricted message. It turns out that execution policy is broken. It is not a security measure and should never be treated as one. And you just again need to, yeah, you can just like toss it to the trash bin. And even reading Microsoft documentation, it was never meant to be used as a security measure. It just should idiot-proof PowerShell for the stupid user who doesn't need to execute PowerShell. But if a user intentionally wants to execute PowerShell, you can't stop him from doing so by execution policy. And indeed, I found this nice little blog post about this registry value. All you need to do is just to set this registry value, which resides in the HKCU hive, meaning that you even don't need to be an admin to set it. And you can set it to unrestricted, and you don't need this -AP bypass thing, which is, again, kind of amazing. And this is the second trait which I added to my malicious document, all again by hand, which is kind of frustrating, and you need to do it in VBA. And it's a really annoying thing to do, but I have my second trait. And now, well, it is not a single vendor. It is never a single vendor you need to check it against. It is the first vendor, and then the second one, and then the third one, and everything by hand. And you have like 8 different combinations to check of traits, and you do it all by hand. And then you find, like, after doing all of the vendors, you find this perfect combination. But this takes a lot of time. And my goal with Invoke-NoShell was solving it. So in order to do so, I've started to think about what is the technology where I can create all of this stuff automatically and create a malicious payload, a malicious document with a payload from code and I used PowerShell to do so. And the result was this nice thing called Invoke-NoShell. It is basically a PowerShell script, object-oriented PowerShell, which is kind of the macro doc, which has all of these kinds of traits being translated into members and member functions. And it communicates with Office COM object. It just like uses the WinWord instance, which means you need to have Office installed. But well, this kind of makes sense. And it just like generates on the fly all the different permutations of the possible ways to, for example, to bypass the execution policy, or to launch PowerShell either by PowerShell ISE or by PowerShell, and either to launch the payload on open, on close, or on user click. It just like creates a link in the document that will trigger it. So those are the options. Those are the potential hosts for the PowerShell script. And you can bypass the execution policy, as I said. And a nice thing I added just recently is the option to embed an object in the document. So this this setting content MS thing, which was quite popular for the last couple of months, well, it generates just another permutation of all of those traits with this thing embedded inside. It is really easy to do this kind of stuff since it is written in an object-oriented way. It is available online. You'll be able to see it, of course. And it is really easy to add this kind of stuff inside. And once you do it, you just click on a button and you get all of the results. There are actually two different modes to this. You have a manual mode, where you select all of those traits manually. And you have an automatic mode, where you just like press a single key, and you have 13 different combinations of traits, which is really easy because you don't need to manually edit the VBA code anymore. You just like press on this auto exploit button, and you get tons of different variations of this malicious document. And I am lazy. I really like it. It already saved me time in my daily life. So a little demonstration of how it works. This is me actually executing Invoke-NoShell. I give it a path to the payload, a mode, which is manual, to actually enter my traits manually, and a text to lure the victim, click me, nothing that complex. And my movie will now print the banner, an awesome banner of Invoke-NoShell, which is just like my shirt, a shell and no. And now I just like select two, which is on document close, launch the payload. I want to force execution if it is restricted, and I want to use PowerShell ISE as the host to the script. It is that easy. I don't need to edit any VBA code anymore. You can just like take your payload of choice and embed it in a document without messing around with actually writing the VBA. And we're done. On the other hand, you can also use it in the automatic mode. This is the auto mode. I even don't use any arguments here like in the last movie. I just like insert them by hand. It will ask me questions to get like the payload path and the lure text and all of the other stuff. And then, well, yeah, you can see I have a typo here, and then I'll put it in. And again, like eat me in this case, because why not? And auto mode. And then instead of asking me which traits I want to add to my, in fact, it will just like generate everything. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's not that doesn't matter really much. It's just like, sorry. It will just like generate after 5 minutes all of those different documents, which is awesome. Okay, and yeah, you can see eat me. It's not really surprising, and I even commented the VBA code it generates. Yeah, awesome. So it even I commented, and well, you can really enjoy and edit it. And we've seen the motivations for using it so far. We've seen like how it works, and let's speak about the results. I did a quick test whether it works or not. I used the payload, which is the Saturn ransomware, I just like read it as a stream of bytes. I used invoke reflective injection, which is really popular thing, and I just like injected the shellcode to itself and used it as a payload. Nothing too fancy or local. Even I didn't use like base 64 encoding. Really simple stuff. I generated 13 different documents. The victim was Windows 10, 64-bit, 5 popular enterprise AV software, including next-gen AVs, which is just another AV. Some of them are really good, but it is just another AV. And they were fully enabled, fully capable, enterprise scale, enterprise grade, and, well, it's time for checking if you had great success or not. I defined the success criterion, which is kind of awkward. I wanted at least one of my payloads to actually bypass the AV, and at least one to fail. Because if all of the payloads bypass the AV, well, my tool is worthless because the AV is worthless, and you don't need a tool to bypass the AV. And if all failed, the AV is good, but my tool is worthless. So, thankfully, I had 100% success ratio. Out of those, in 40% of the cases, actually, all of the payloads bypass the AV, which is kind of awkward. But in 60% of the cases, my tool was useful. So I think I can get the Chuck Norris approved seal. And since we're kind of running out of time, let's go to the takeaways. Well, for red teamers, use this tool, work in scale effectively. Adopt new techniques really fast. Take it in and use it without messing around. If you're a VBA, just like take a PowerShell payload, launch it without PowerShell, and do it in no time. It is really easy to use. You need no prerequisites. Just git clone and even copy the raw PowerShell script. It is really easy. But I want blue teamers also to take something from here. Don't rely on this 100% satisfaction guarantee promises of the vendors. Test it yourself. It is really easy as a blue teamer to create many malicious documents or malicious. You can also just like pop calcs, I don't know, and to check whether or not the environment actually limits PowerShell as they expect. Don't rely on those snake oil promises. It is, yeah, it is just like, no, simply no, don't do it. And without further ado, we'll go to the Q&A session. This is a cat. I have a cat slide in every one of my talks. He looks at PowerShell on a Mac. I found this stock photo online. I can't explain it. I have literally no explanation what the actual... We are streamed, so I am not going to say fuck. And I think we can go to Q&A now. Thanks. No questions?
In its current version, is there any anti-sandbox or sandbox detection built in?
No, I didn't took the measures to evade sandbox or anything, which in my understanding should be done by the payload itself. I tried to keep it as clean as possible with nothing like malicious, you might say, in my framework. It's really easy to add this kind of stuff.
As it stands with this module, could you create an executable that can run on its own, or is it just for creating the documents that contain the payload?
In this stage, it actually creates only a document with the payload, but you can do anything in this like style too. You're talking about like taking an executable to launch a PowerShell using PowerShell IC. It is really easy. You should do it in no time. I trust you.
So I got the malicious content in that Word document. Was that VBS?
No, actually it's VBA, like the macro itself is VBA, and it holds all of the payload as lines, actual text lines inside the macro code.
Okay.
And it just like concatenates it, and in my case, in some of the scenarios, it actually writes it to the disk. So it is not fileless, but who cares? It bypasses all of the AVs. Interestingly, there's a limitation in VBA. you can't exceed 1,024 characters in VBA line, which is very annoying. It limits your payload, and also you can't use non-ASCII characters, which also kind of suck. But my tool actually checks it. It checks it prior to the creation of the payload, and it will alert you if you've broken the VBA.
And did you build this tool in C#?
No,
or?
it is in PowerShell.
Okay.
I kind of regret it.
Purely PowerShell.
Yeah.
All right.
But it is kind of well coded and documented. You can have a look. It is good. If you have questions, feel free to ask.
Hello.
Hi.
This is pretty rad. I work as a blue teamer, and this makes me want to red team. I had a question. You tested Invoke-NoShell against a number of antivirus utilities. Did you try against any EDR solutions like Carbon Black or otherwise?
Well, Carbon Black, no, I didn't try it specifically against Carbon Black. Also, I'm not sure if I'm allowed legally to say exactly against who I tested, but it wasn't Carbon Black. But yeah. Carbon Black may alert like other EDR solutions and this kind of stuff, but EDR solutions kind of alert on anything, and as a blue teamer, I think you can kind of...
I'm very aware.
Yeah, yeah. Alert is just like log in this case, I guess.
Hi. So when you were testing the different combinations against different AV, did you find that there were some combinations that were working across the board more often than not? Or
yeah.
Okay. And is that information documented, or is there any, if we were to...
I can tell you right now, it was the case of using PowerShell ISE and launching it on a user click. You can actually write the payload to the disk, and to launch PowerShell ISE from a user click on document, and then you avoid using shell execute. You avoid like using PowerShell.exe, and well, they just don't get you. So
cool. Thanks.
Yeah, that's the magic bullet.
I think we can probably take one more question. What would you just really warmly thank him, because that was fun.